COVID-19 was a large aggregate shock. So it affected all the economic sectors worldwide at the same time, and effects were very much prominent in all the communities, and income from all the sources went down at once. So literature have highlighted various mechanisms that households use to smooth shocks. For example, informal risk sharing, selling assets and livestock, increasing labor supply, cutting back on non-food and food expenditures, and using saving and credit. Literatures have highlighted these informal risk-sharing networks as a key mechanism that households use to smooth shocks. That could be within the village or among the friends and relatives or within the country or even abroad. But since this COVID-19 was a major shock, households could not rely even on this insurance through social networks because everyone were affected at once. So evidence suggests that households are reluctant to sell livestock or assets to preserve consumption, and they may choose to smooth assets and withstand a short-run loss in consumption in order to maintain a long-run productive potential of a household. So understanding the economic impact of COVID-19 in low to income countries or to high income countries has increasingly become an important research topic. But this existing literature is constrained by the lack of data and inability to do surveys due to restriction imposed on mobility and physical distancing requirements during pandemic. So most of the existing literature are either model-based scenario analysis of aggregated data or short-term household data collected through telephone interviews. So there is limited empirical evidence based on household level survey data that would quantify the effect of COVID-19 on household income and consumption, particularly for rural households in developing countries. These household surveys are critical because this model-based scenario analysis, or say simulation models, they often overlook a large segment of a population that work in informal sector, which are not captured by official statistics, particularly in developing countries. And oftentimes these telephone interviews are short and they are not very comprehensive as household level survey data, and it may not reach up to the poor households who may not be able to own telephone or live in places where there is a very low connectivity. So this household level survey data is actually important to capture the actual impact that is happening at the ground level, at the household level, due to such kind of economic shocks. So the main objective of our study is to estimate the economic effect of COVID-19 on rural farm households' income and expenditure, and to understand what coping strategies that the household adopted during the time of this major economic shock. So our study relies on primary data that is collected from rural communities surrounding Chitwan National Park in Nepal. It was collected from late October until late December in 2020. So this timing of the survey provided us a unique opportunity to accumulate data or to collect data on households' annual income and consumption before and during the pandemic and the coping strategy that the household adopted during the pandemic. So because we have this detailed information on households' economic well-being, we could estimate how this COVID-19 affected households in a year following the global outbreak. So we collected data from Chitwan National Park buffer zone and its surrounding adjacent areas. So this green area is the core national park area where there is no settlement. But this area within this blue boundary in the periphery of core national park area is the buffer zone area where there is a settlement. And we collect the data from these buffer zone areas and the adjacent areas, these gray shaded areas, it is the non-buffer zone areas that lies outside the boundary of the buffer zone. So we collected our data from these areas. So this Chitwan National Park is also the UNESCO World Heritage Sites, and it harbors like world's charismatic megafauna like tiger, elephant, one-horned rhino. So it is also one of the most visited national parks in Nepal. It is the oldest one and one of the highest revenue generating national parks in Nepal. So agriculture with livestock is the mainstay of local communities, but businesses, off-farm businesses and employment, including tourism, is also one of the major economic activities that happen around the communities in this buffer zone areas. So we selected our sample. This Chitwan National Park area and its buffer zone areas are divided into these 4 administrative sectors, like Eastern, Madi, Kasara, and Western sector. And this whole buffer zone is divided into 22 buffer zone user committees. So these buffer zone user committees are responsible for carrying out different kinds of buffer zone related programs in the buffer zone areas. So we randomly selected 9 buffer zone user committees, and we interviewed households from these buffer zone committees that are shaded in these blue areas and these adjacent areas outside the selected buffer zone committees, in the non-buffer zone areas. So altogether, 728 households were interviewed, and among them 316 are tourism-involved households. So for the analysis, we used panel fixed effect model utilizing 2-year data from 2019 and 2020. So our outcome variable is per capita household income. We transform our income variable in terms of inverse hyperbolic sign transformation so that it mitigates this influence of outliers and also retain 0 values, and it can be interpreted as log linear specification. So we use this specification as in equation 1 to carry out the model. So here YIT is household per capita income, and COVID-T is a dummy that equals to 1 for 2020 and 0 for 2019. And this del I is household fixed effect, which gets cancelled out in this panel fixed effect model. So in order to capture the differential effect of COVID-19 on household income that are located in different sectors and also in different locations, and also to capture the effect in tourism involved household, we augmented this equation 1 as equation 2. Here we included this interaction between location and COVID dummy. With this location indicates if household is inside the buffer zone or outside the buffer zone. And in another model, we also included this sector dummy interacted with this COVID. So sector is if a household is located in one of those sectors in the buffer zone area. So it has non-buffer zone as a base case, because of which we didn't include it in a same model. So here we also involve if a household is involved in tourism activities interacted with this year dummy. So we also carried out to test the consumption smoothing. So we segregated our total expenditure into food expenditure and non-food expenditure, and we ran the first differencing model. So this delta FC is the difference in food consumption expenditure for household I between year 2019 and 20. And here it's similar to income model that we included a location dummy interacted with COVID, and similarly tourism dummy interacted with COVID. And we did same for this non-food expenditure. So here are the results. So this table shows sample income distribution among the respondents in 2019 and 2020. This vertical red line shows the line of the poverty line, that is less than $2 per day, which is calculated at its annual equivalent value. So this shows that significant proportion of household is still under this poverty line, which is more than 17% in case of Nepal, which has been recently estimated by National Planning Commission. So this makes household more vulnerable to economic shocks because there are so many households that are below the poverty line. And so this matrix shows this household mobility pattern in the income decile in 2019 and 2020. Diagonal line here, it shows their status quo situation, which means, like, for example, in this first decile, it shows 81% of household had a chance of being there in the same group in 2020. So for example, for the fourth decile, you can see this 18% of households remained in the same decile in 2020, and only 8% they moved upward in the income decile. And here, how much is this? 73% of the household, they moved downward in the income decile. So for the richer households, say if you look at this ninth decile, you can see only 13% of the household remained in the same decile, and the rest 87% they moved downward in the income decile in 2020. So this bar diagram shows how COVID-19 affected income from various sources in 2020 then compared to 2019. As expected, you can see this income from business were severely affected. And it is also similar situation is for employment and remittance income. But for the agriculture income, generally one would expect that during the time of such economic shock, agriculture income would go up as there would be more labor input in the agriculture. And it was also the case in Nepal, like overall productivity from the agriculture, it went up, but the situation was a bit different in Chitwan because they also had another agriculture income shock, which happened due to crop disease in the Chitwan region. So they had this disease in rice, because of which they had less harvest in 2020. So as a result, income from agriculture also went down in Chitwan area. And here you can see it's contrary to what happened in Australia and in other developed countries. Government poured billions of dollars to keep businesses in developed countries, but in Nepal there was no cash transfer. Of course, like there were some form of support from government in terms of basic food supplies to very poor households, but no cash transfers, because of which this income from welfare didn't go up in 2020. So now the results from our model that shows the effect of COVID-19 on household income. So this is the result for the base model, and here we are using this as a final result where we have also included this interaction term. Tourism interacted with COVID and different sector interacted with COVID. So it showed that household per capita income reduced by 44% in 2020 than compared to 2019, and the effect is even more severe for tourism involved household. So here you can see, like for the tourism involved household, per capita household income got reduced by 77% in 2020. So, and these effects were prominent in Eastern and Kasara sector, where it got reduced by 60% in Eastern and 70% in Kasara sector, but there were no, this is like our base case is non-buffer zone area. So in the Western and Mahdi sector, there were no significant effect. So it could be because this Eastern and Kasara sector are the most tourism activities concentrated areas in Chitwan National Park. So it is the, this matrix shows this mobility pattern for the food consumption expenditure in 2019 and 2020. It shows that COVID-19 has a remarkable effect on food consumption for poor as well as rich households. For example, if you see for the poor household that are in the third decile, it shows that only 44% remain in the same decile, whilst you can see like 37% they moved downward in the food consumption expenditure decile in 2020. So for this 8th decile, you can see 45% were there, only 8% moved upward in the expenditure decile, and the rest, it's 49%, they went downward in the food consumption expenditure decile in 2020. Similar is the case for this non-food expenditure, like for this 4th decile, 33% remained in this same group, but it is, how much is this? 65% they went downward in their non-food expenditure decile, And even for this ninth decile or richer household, you can see only 28% remained in the same decile for this non-food expenditure. Only 1% they moved upward, but the rest they all went downward in this non-food expenditure decile. So here is the result of the effect of COVID-19 on household expenditure, which is segregated into per capita food expenditure and per capita non-food expenditure. So this is the final model that we have used for the result. So it shows that COVID-19 has reduced households per capita food expenditure by 9% in 2020. And this effect is prominent only in Western sector. In terms of non-food expenditure, our results showed that COVID-19 has due to COVID-19, household per capita non-food expenditure got reduced by 32%. And this is prominent in Kasara and Western sector. So, although globalization has increased household income through tourism and international labor market, but it has also exposed household to increased risk during global economic shocks like COVID-19. Rural households are severely affected by COVID-19 and income from all sources went down. Nepal as a whole turned to agriculture and increased labor input in agriculture, because of which it observed increased agricultural productivity as a whole. But in Chitwan, there was also an agricultural yield shock, because of which income from agriculture went down. Households coped with the income losses by reducing food and non-food expenditure. It was like food expenditure were reduced by 9% and non-food expenditure were reduced by more than 30%. Welfare payments, unlike in developed countries, there were no increase in welfare payments because there were no cash transfer, as I indicated earlier. So this policy implications, it relates to rapid income support when local support mechanisms fail. When faced with COVID shocks like this, and there is this income from all sources, it went down. So government as well as this international development agencies, they should focus on providing immediate support or spontaneous support when there is such kind of economic shock, because lack of support to vulnerable rural households may lead to persistent poverty trap dynamics. So thank you all for your kind attention. If there is any question, comment, feedback, I would be very happy to receive it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pratikshya, for the interesting presentation. I remember during lockdown in Philippines, we experienced the impacts of COVID-19 as well. But the government provided support, like you mentioned, there was no cash transfer. But we had a cash transfer. We also had the goods there, different grocery items. And the third one was the local government was providing jobs for the people where their income could boost. The other interesting that happened was there was a policy related to deferring the payments for any loans, mortgages. So the households felt like, even me personally, I felt like I had more disposable income, which definitely affected my expenditure. So I'm interested to know if in Nepal there was any kind of government support for that kind of policy, which may have actually affected their income and expenditure during the COVID.
Yeah, thank you for your question. Actually, as I mentioned in my presentation, there were no direct cash transfer, but yeah, local governments, local level governments were providing this grocery supplies or food supplies for these poorer households. So there was only this, so there were no other kind of welfare programs that were noticed.
Thank you.
So the income went down and expenditure went down in response to income coming down. Do you know if families had any savings or assets? Did they sell assets or did they just stop spending?
What we noticed, I mean, in the field was like households, they are not selling assets as of because it was immediately after the COVID. Maybe if it were like prolonged for some time, maybe they would have to sell the asset because they cannot continue eating less or spending less money. Yeah, I think they relied more on locally available resources which they used to sell. Like for example, even the crops or other things which they used to sell, they had it without selling, and they depended on that. So because of which also I think it also had an effect on their income because they didn't sell their crops, and also effect on their consumption expenditures because they were not buying things from the market but relying more on their own produce.
Got a question. Great presentation, by the way. Really liked it. My question is more surrounding the distribution of wealth. So I think at the start you showed a chart of the annual salary, and then you further talked about their income and their expenses broken down by in that matrix, where you showed whether it changed for the the first decile or the 10th decile. Do you think the effects would change if you incorporated the income level of the households? So for example, the richer people would, I noticed that for the highest decile, they weren't changing their expenditure. If you broke it down by that, would you see any differences in the results?
Yeah, actually, that's a very important point. I'm planning to do it.
Okay.
I haven't done yet. So yeah, I'm planning to do this quantile regression, looking at how different households in different level of their income are affected by COVID-19.
I think it's interesting when you talk about the different industries and how the income has changed over the years. For example, like businesses versus tourism. Maybe a lot of the richer people are running businesses and then that drops by, I think, 60-70%. But maybe that doesn't affect their expenditure that much because they already have funds on the side.
Yeah, you're right.
Could be interesting to see.
Yeah, that's what the next step is that.
Okay.
Very interesting presentation. My question is regarding your method of estimation, because you say that the model was estimated using the panel of fixed effects, but you only had 2 years.
Yeah.
So was this a fixed effects or did you use a good regression? So I was wondering, when you talk about fixed effects, then what is your measure? Is the household the farm effect, or is it the regions that you're using as the farm effects? The reason why I'm asking that question is because if you look at that equation that you have, particularly has just put there, that is food expenditure. And what you're saying is that your difference in food expenditure between those 2 time periods, when you're estimating a fixed effect. So my understanding is that if you want to do that, then you need data that is having at least more than 3 time periods, because then once you difference, you lose 1 period. So that then really makes me question, are you estimating this using fixed effects or is this just full regression?
Yeah, I used fixed effect panel model using 2 years data.
So it's probably equivalent to the primitive regression model.
It's the same with the other model, right?
Yeah,
But the result was
because
similar
the question
to
is, then are you using the mean effects or are you using between effects? Because my understanding is that I'm not sure whether that is really possible. You can estimate that using good regression, which is okay. But if you want to do the fixed effects, especially if you're looking at your household, so you have, is it a balanced panel or not balanced panel? So if you have balanced panel, then if you do that equation, when you difference it, you're going to be losing one year. So you just end up then remaining with just 1 period here. So I'm not sure that that is possible. So I may be wrong, but that's my understanding of how the fixed effect model works. So it could be that we are estimating using a full regression. Just check. I may be wrong,
Okay,
but
yeah,
go and
thank
check
you.
with your
I'll check that.
and make sure whether that is actually correct or whether I'm missing something.
What might have happened is you just have 2 periods. You take just the first difference. Once you take the difference, first difference is equal to the 2 period
Fixed effect model.
That's what happening. But then you effectively take the difference between the observation between 2 years and you have a single series.
Yeah.
So you take out all the time invariant variables. Time invariant variables are out, and only time varying variable, which is the income and the sort of things.
So the delta I is being taken out.
Yeah.
I think that's taken out.
Taken out.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's taken out.
So you don't learn anything about the household effect at the end.
Because they are, as long as the characteristics are same, they are just cancelled out.
Yeah.
Okay, but then my question comes then to the data that you have there, which is, okay, the beta then becomes the dummy variable. So the dummy variable, so it's just speaking before COVID and after COVID.
Yeah, exactly.
But then you have lost 1 year. So just to think about it. So if you have lost 1 year, which was prior to COVID, then what you have remained with is just the year when we had COVID. So then your dummy variable is just going to be, if it's 0 and 1, then if it's speaking then 1, then it's just going to be all 1.
So what's the dependent variable? The log of income difference?
Yeah, it was IHS, inverse hyperbolic sine transformation of income, which can be interpreted as log. Because we had, we carried out the same thing for different sources of income, and there were 0 values, so taking log of 0 doesn't make sense. So we did this IHS to retain the 0 values.
So that's okay because it's variable, but my point is when we come to the dummy, your independent variable, then if you are differencing, then ask yourself, what are you doing? Because then if what Ram is saying is correct, then you'll be losing, for instance, that year before, prior to COVID. Therefore, the dummy is just capturing only just the COVID period. So there's no variability in that, it's just a 1. Anyway, go and look at it.
Yeah.
Just go and look at the
Yes,
model. And then my next question is, when you come to income, the per capita income, yes?
The COVID would be 0 for 2019
Yes.
and 1 for 20.
So either way, then it's either a 0 or a 1.
But
it's
when
no
you take the
variability.
difference, it becomes 1.
Either, yeah.
And then you don't have the intercept.
Yeah.
Because the intercept is washed. So your COVID thing is the intercept. Is that that's what's happening here, right?
Yeah.
So the intercept becomes the COVID coefficient because the intercept is washed out in the subtraction. Just like the household effect.
Yeah.
It's washed out.
Yeah.
Yeah, you need to explain this a bit more, I think.
It's more
Yeah, I think it's worth looking at the first difference versus the 2 period panel as you run. So I think we had discussion about it.
Yeah.
So effectively, the result was.
As I read it and understand, like running
it's easy
fixed
to
effect for
explain
2
using a full regression. But when you try to make it to a dummy, to a panel fixed effect, then those are the questions I will be asking. Is it an individual effect? Is it a time effect?
Yeah.
Okay. Is it a two-way effect that you're trying to estimate? And then when you put the difference in, then to me that's where the problem comes. Just have a look at that. And then the next question is your income. Is that real income or just the nominal income? Because what you want ideally is to get a consumer price index so that you remove the effect of inflation. Okay, the change in the value of the income due to inflation, so that that income is comparable between the 2 periods. Okay, but anyway, if you are differencing your data and you only have 2 periods, then maybe that would not matter because then you just be left with 1 period. So you're not comparing between 2 periods, and that's why again it comes to my problem. If you do the fixed effect, then I just think that you still need at least more than 2 periods for that to make sense.
So I think you just switch to group regression.
Yeah.
Start still picking up on average.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. We have some time. If anyone wants to ask to Sophie online, could you unmute yourself and speak up if you have a question. You don't have too many people online, so that's fine. So we forgot to share the slides. I think I need to write instructions. So they didn't see the slides. They could hear you, but they didn't see the slides. That's why I'm flipping through them, so they get an idea of what you shared. It's a disaster.
Thanks, Pratikshya. Could you just quickly flick through those slides again so we can see them?
From the top? Or?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So
it's surprising how difficult it is to understand without seeing the slides.
Yeah. Okay, I will let you walk them through.
Okay, can you just flick through? Thanks.
We're not seeing it.
You're not seeing it?
No, we're just stuck on the first slide.
Stop.
You are. Why is that?
Just flick through them without going full screen.
Ah, is that why?
Yeah. That will help.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Okay. Some household income. Okay. Really interesting. Right. Yeah. Now I understand. Yeah.
Finally.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh.
So could have done the whole thing in 2 minutes.
No, not really.
Pictures especially.
But it puts the
It's very clear, yeah.
yeah, but it puts it together, right?
So if you go back to your income, your main income results, yeah, that one. So just COVID wipes out about 44% of the income, and then this is just for a person not in tourism, Eastern, or okay. So, but if someone is in the tourism areas, then the effect is basically what? That's like
77.
Okay, so almost all their income is gone.
Yeah, because the industry is shut.
Shut.
Completely shut.
Yeah. Okay. So the rest of their income would be just from something else.
Some remittances possibly, but that
shut.
It was like a perfect storm of coincidences. You know that the tourism sector shut down, and then the overseas markets where people from the household worked also shut down.
Yes.
So the busy dummy, that was a business?
This is buffer zone.
Buffer zone.
Those
Buffer
households
zone.
who are inside buffer zone or outside buffer zone.
Okay, so it didn't matter. Okay, and that why did you not keep that in the last model? It wasn't significant?
Here, these 4 sectors, this Eastern, Kasara, Western, and Mahdi. So our base case is non-buffer zone areas. So it would be like kind of correlated, right? If we include both in the same model.
So in terms of like adapting to shocks, or like my welfare designing like welfare systems and so on, what is the lesson you get from this?
Yeah, I mean, if you see this tourism involved household, don't put all your eggs in one basket. I mean, you have to diversify. If you diversify household, chances of having at least minimum level of income when there is kind of shock that would affect one industry.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And in terms of the government, so the government wasn't paying more. It was like the welfare system doesn't work because when people don't have incomes, nothing happens. Yeah.
Failure of the welfare system.
Yeah. Does that reflect just the fact that the system isn't designed to be responsive, or does it also reflect the fact that the government revenues themselves are dependent on the sectors that are affected greatly? What does the government revenue look like? How important is tourism to government revenue?
Yeah, it's important. Tourism is also one of the important sector that would bring a lot of money to the country.
Yeah.
But I think it's programs and policies are not designed in such a way that that they would provide instantaneous support to these vulnerable households who are affected by COVID-19, and the lack of the proper policies and programs to support those kind of poor households in the time of such economic.
So it's not just the case of COVID. In Nepal, the welfare system is not very well. So any kind of natural calamity happens, the system is stable. The vulnerable people are the affected ones.
So what exactly is a welfare system? Who is getting those payments?
Or those welfare payments, actually, it includes all sort of payments. For example, it would be old age subsidies or like single women subsidies. So there are these sorts of funds that people, elderly people, or if there are widowed single women in a household, they would get some money, monthly money subsidies from government. So it includes all those kind of income sources.
Sure. Which is the proportion of production that is used for self-consumption? For self-consumption, I mean, which is the proportion we use out of the production?
I can't like clearly say this amount of is used for their own proportion, but during COVID, yeah,
That went up.
Certainly, yeah, they didn't sell because of this inaccessibility to market, and as well as they kept it for their security to have it the next year. So they didn't sell, because of which also agriculture income went down.
So you have almost 1,500 observations. That's a lot of observations. Like, so do you have are you being tempted to do something else on like something in terms of the econometrics? Is it possible to do other things, more fancy stuff, or is this?
Sorry.
Please,
Do you want to say
No,
what fancy
please.
stuff? So please correct me if I'm wrong. This was the main thing was to look at training within the buffer zone, so we could propensity score matching between households inside and outside the zone. But because Pratikshya was in Nepal doing the survey during COVID, we thought well, it was actually an opportunity to look at these rural households and how they coped with COVID. So this wasn't the main.
This wasn't the main
survey.
thing. Yeah.
It was designed for another purpose.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Even within this, I think you might want to elaborate further. We have looked at the sector-wise income and how those individual sectors based on income have been affected, which is not presented here. And also, primarily the area where she surveyed is a tourism hotspot and a national park, a lot of tourists visit here. Those households, 316 or whatever, were mostly dependent on tourism. So what's the sole effect among those households? So that's a separate question.
Do you have a set of variables variables that vary over time, that they are not fixed effects, so that you can be able to control and see at a household level what really is explaining that variability in income and expenditure. Do you have any variables to control that?
I think we have figured out that that's because it's just a good time period. It had picked up. Not a lot of household characteristics would change between that time. I'm not sure that needs to.
But if you think, for instance, if it's the rural data, maybe something like farm size, if farm size will matter in terms of income or their wealth, maybe at a household level. Something that can just give an indication at household level, the heterogeneity that we have and how that is captured. Because this is good story, but then it's just giving us the story of just prior to COVID and post-COVID and during COVID, but then we cannot be able to explain across the households what explains the variability in income.
Sure. I think that is possible if you look at the general determinants of household income model.
Yeah.
Rather than just being specific COVID. Just look at
because you can
determines
control
household
those
income.
variables.
Yeah, determines household income, and then you use that. I mentioned earlier, just a full regression, and that would be that.
Okay, Julian online, do you have a question or you are happy?
I'm faculty.
Yeah.
To look at this in more detail when I get a chance. But yes, no, that's very, very interesting indeed, and seems a very convincing argument.
Okay, Ross, do you want to say something?
Pratikshya, just a question. Do you know what's happened to those households in the more recent period? I'm thinking of what happened in Indonesia, that there were many people involved in tourism that came from fishing hamlets, and they have returned to fishing, and they're now engaged in a lot of illegal fishing in the northern parts of Australia. So that was their adjustment mechanism to move out of tourism back into agriculture. What's happening to these households in Nepal?
Yeah, thank you for the question. These households are actually, they were waiting for this COVID COVID effect to go down, and now even when there was no international tourism, when COVID went down to a certain level, there was this, and when lockdown was lifted, after quite some time, there was this influx of domestic tourists, and I think we didn't really observe something deviating from this tourism sector for tourism households. They were just like waiting for this COVID things to go, and then wait for the international tourists to come.
So the national park was safe? The equivalent of the fish would be they would go into the national park and start exploiting it, right?
Yes. It was indeed the case during COVID, yes.
They were?
Yeah, perfect safety environment for wildlife.
Oh yeah, because they can't move.
Yes.
There were no jeep safari and kind of things.
Yeah. They were roaming around.
So it had the opposite effect.
Yes.
Yeah. But in any way, this fishing and kind of things are not allowed in Nepal's national park. Policy doesn't allow any kind of harvest.
They could cut down trees. I think that's quite common in developing countries. If they, if they are poor and they don't have any source of income, the first thing is just exploit the forest, right?
If I may comment on Ross' observation, do you hear me now?
Yes, yep.
I think the point you are raising is very important. How these households are coping with this kind of things. Have they modified their enterprise, or have they moved away from tourism, or started some mixed kind of enterprise? I think the data doesn't tell us that story for sure, but I think to some degree, yes, just the observation. To some degree, yes, people started to move away, or maybe have some sort of other approaches in order to maintain their income. but we don't know the empirical information. But I think personally, yes, they have moved here and there to adjust their yes.
Okay. Any last question? We can take one and then close. Okay. In that case, I think just on those tables you had with the percentiles, the sides moving. Of course, the deciles will shift because some people are being affected while others are being affected. That's like tourism versus other. So I am not sure whether you couldn't do something more in that front, because if you want to sharpen the analysis, then you would want to do that by groups, not overall, because obviously
that's the quantile regression.
Yeah.
That's the quantile regression we have been discussing.
Okay, great. So, yeah, well, we should close with that. Thank you. Very interesting presentation.